Hello chess friends and welcome to the Chess channel and welcome back to the new In Chess Classic tournament in 2021. We're now in the second day of the super final between Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen. So the first day ended of course with a great win by Magnus Carlsen. Now in the second day it was time for Hikaru Nakamura to make something happen. He did it in the first game. He outplayed Magnus Carlsen with a brilliant performance in the game one. The second game ended in a draw, and now we're in the third game. It was sort of a match point of the day two for Hikaru Nakamura. If he now wins this game, then both of them have to play these additional games, and maybe we'll see also the Armageddon game in the continuation of this very nice super final. So let's check out now what happened. The game one, which Hikaru won, was really incredible. The game three was or maybe even slightly better. So let's check out now. Here d4 played by Hikaru, d5 by Magnus, c4. We have e6, the queen's gambit decline. We have knight to c3, bringing out the knight of course, and now we have the a6, the so-called Janovsky variation. It's a very tricky line because what we are trying from black perspective here to do is d takes c4. Then would be b5. We would have a fixed pawn structure on the queen side. We can then further fixed maybe here the queen side with the move c6. So that's why one of the best ways here for white is simply to proceed c takes d5, undermining a little bit the pressure because it's obvious that the expansion on the queen side will come. And if you maybe block this idea with the move a4, even if you block b5 ideas, then black can go here with the move d takes c4, and after e3 maybe we can play knight to f6, and maybe after bishop to c4. The problem I think always in the Janovsky variation from white perspective, that white had some problems around the square b4. Knight to c6, knight to b4 could happen, and then we could cement really our position around the square d5. So that's why it's a tricky line. As I said, the a4 doesn't bring you even so much. We can immediately, I think, in this position break the position with the move c5. So it's tricky. So that's why, as I said, if you're getting into this Janovsky, my recommendation is like Hikaru here to undermine the pressure. After c takes d5, e takes d5, and now bringing off of course the bishop out, because if you play e3 too early, then you could block out your dark square bishop. So first developing the dark square bishop, knight to f6, and now after move e3, Magnus Carlsen goes with the move bishop to d6. He doesn't tolerate this bishop on f4. He doesn't want Hikaru to have this great activity, and how Hikaru Nakamura trade off simply the bishops. Bishop takes d6, queen to d6. The problem I think a little bit here for white is here that you with the move bishop to d6 invited your opponent's queen into the game. The queen got out with the tempo. When it comes to bishop's activity, I think white is slightly better because many pawns on the queen side here on light squares in a potential endgame. If you could just imagine this position without maybe the knights, without the queens on the board, then this d5 could be a long-term weakness. So that's why maybe slightly advantage when it comes to bishop's activity. So that's why bishop to d3 here. Never ever allow Magnus Carlsen to come on f5. If bishop to f5 happens, then black could have a powerful control of the e4, and you could have some serious trouble to defend this where you couldn't then play of course f3 because you're weakening the e3, but you're weakening also your dark square diagonal here. So that's why you have to battle immediately for the centralized squares, and here Magnus Carlsen goes with the move bishop to g4. He's waiting now one of these knights to come out on f3 or on e2. When that happens, Magnus wants to trade off simply the bishop for a knight, and then go into a knight versus bishop middle game, where he could maybe after castling and rook to e8 find a great way to really occupy this e4 square. So in the continuation, Hikaru tried queen to b3, and the next couple of moves I really like by Magnus. Of course, it's an attack. We have left the defense of the b7 pawn, but Magnus Carlsen is playing now sharp line. He plays knight to c6, inviting Hikaru to take out the pawn. If you want to take out the pawn, if you take, for instance, queen to b7, then we can immediately castling or play rook to b8, and then you could have some troubles around the square b2. So here you could maybe take out this pawn, but the problem is now this move, knight to b4, and you see now the knight comes out with a great tempo. And we should, I think, notice that white still has two more moves at least to play in order to castle somehow. Maybe knight to f3, knight to e2, and then castle. So at least two more tempi. Meanwhile, you see black is attacking already the position. You have to play queen to a4. We can now play bishop to d7. We're getting more tempi against the queen. Queen to d1, knight takes d3, queen to d3, and now rook to b2. I think the rook comes very active into the game. Still, as we said, you need at least two more tempi. Meanwhile, black is, I think, slightly faster in the development, but okay, still the engine gives here slightly edge left for white. Maybe even it was an opportunity for Hikaru to go into this very tricky line. He didn't want to risk things as he has now the first win from the first round. Now he tried to play a calm game, played now h3, kicking away the bishop, so he didn't take out the pawn on b7. And now after move bishop to h5, knight to e2, played by Magnus, and finally this strategical idea to go into knight versus bishop endgame, where we could control, of course, the move, the square e4, because we've mentioned many times in these types of structures, when the static centers here, when the pawns in the center cannot move, we're searching simply for outposts. From black's perspective, we're trying to occupy the e4 and c4. From white's perspective, the c5 and e5. And you see now the knight has moved. You need again many tempi in order to make somehow here your progress around the square e5. So I think when it comes to occupying the squares, black is slightly faster with the moves like castling, rook to e8, and then again knight to e4 would create, I think, a very powerful outpost. So here castling played by Magnus, rook to c1. We have now knight to d8, because there was now the serious threat to take out here the pawn. If you don't react, maybe rook to e8, then we could actually take. That's the main issue, and the knight would be then hanging. So that's why here it's a very important move now by Magnus Carlsen to play the move rook to d8, and now queen to a3. And here again, like Magnus Carlsen's move, he could have, of course, trade off the queens. Here queen takes a3, b takes a3, but the problem is now first you have to of course, fix your c6 pawn. And I think with castling and rook to b1 and rook to c1, this would be a very annoying attack on the b file. The pawns could be hanging. You don't have, from black's perspective, the rook connection. You have to in one moment move your knight somewhere, and then your b7 is weak. So that's why after move queen to a3, here queen to d7, Magnus is staying with the queens on the board. And basically there is one rule in chess, in the bishops and knight middle games: the knight and the knight and the queen are functioning much better than a bishop and a queen. So although it's an equal game, I still kind of like more now black's position, because the e4 square, as we said, is a long-term weakness in the position. So here castling, now we have g6 first, blocking out the light squares that the bishop is controlling. Of course, we have knight to f4 by Hikaru Nakamura. Now comes this idea: rook to e8, bishop to c2, and now c6, fixing first the pawn structure on light squares, building a very nice fortress against this light square bishop on c2. We have now knight to d3. Finally, Hikaru Nakamura is also trying his outpost around the square e5, and now Magnus scores simply knight to e6. We have now f4, and here knight to g7, and here comes, I think, one of the critical moments of this game. Here Hikaru Nakamura, as we said, the main strategical goals of this type of structures are occupying these squares, and here Hikaru has, I think, a clear idea how to make it. He has to play, I think, the move knight to e5. The problem always in these types of structures is that it's very hard to kick away this knight from e5, because there are in some occasions some tactics with something like, I don't know, bishop to g6, knight to g6. Maybe not immediately, but if we prove somehow bishop to c2, then maybe getting the bishop to d3, queen to c2, getting the use of this long diagonal, maybe there will be some tactics. Knight to e5 gives here, the engine gives here equal chances for both sides, so it was maybe simply the time to occupy this very important square. But Hikaru played a very risky knight f5 move, and Magnus Carlsen doesn't want to risk anything on the f file. He plays now simply g5, passing through. Really nice setup. And what we can notice now, after the move knight to e5, okay, you have one tempo against the queen to c7, but the problem is now your bishop is blocked out by its own pawn. The bishop, I think, doesn't have such a great activity anymore. I think here it's, black is slightly better. In the continuation, Hikaru tries somehow to break the position, to open the position for the bishop, but it's simply too late. Magnus closes again the position, because with the knight on the board, we want the position to be closed. So that's why g4. Now everything on the king side is perfectly fine. After move queen to c3, now you see how these knights will always find good ways to get into the game in close games, because the knights can change always the squares. You will find somewhere a good position for your knight, and basically you cannot improve your position of the light square bishop. The light square bishop is blocked out by its own pawns, but here on the queen side it's blocked out by this pawn chain that Magnus Carlsen has built here. So it's a paralyzed bishops here. So far black much better now. Queen to e1, here comes really the risky risky move cut by Hikaru Nakamura. It seems again so that nothing dramatically is going on. Queen to e1, we want to maneuver the queen, and Magnus pulls out now a great tactics plays now. Rook to e5 takes the rook, takes the knight here, and now after d takes e5, queen to e5. Look at this knight activity. We're trying now to sneak in with the queen g3, maybe somehow get this pawn. If we play g3, then there are even some checkmate threats. If the queen, for instance, comes on h4, then queen to h4 would be a great opportunity. Here queen to c3, Hikaru realizes now his mistake. The evaluation is +2 for black here. It's really wild. After the positional sacrifice, it's a much better position for Magnus Carlsen. And when you're on the attacking side, you don't want to trade off the queens, of course. Here Magnus plays now queen to g3. Look at this knight activity around the king. The queen is already there. Queen to e1, again Hikaru is trying to trade off the queens. Queen to d6, Magnus is not allowing that. And now after the move queen to f2, we have rook to e8 here, rook to d1. Hikaru Nakamura is trying to defend this position, but still there are always these positional threats to play, for instance the move g3. So after the move rook to d1, Magnus again simply attacks the dark squares. Queen to e5, rook to d4 here by Hikaru Nakamura. He's trying to protect his 4th rank now, and Magnus plays really the best suggested move by the engine, c5. He kicks away simply the rook, rook to d2. We have now knight to g3. That's what I'm talking about here. It's a simple weakness here. Rook to d1. Every move now by Magnus Carlsen, it's a simple attack. King to f8, getting out of the range. Of course, we want maybe even use the g file in order to attack the full position further. Maybe to get this rook somehow here. Maybe here to h5 if the position allows it. Getting this pawn, threatening even checkmate on h1. So whatever black does, I think Magnus Carlsen has here a decent position. The problem is now this pawn is protected. So again, I'm pointing out this move f5 was simply a strategical mistake here by Hikaru Nakamura. Now rook to d3, we have now knight to e4. Look how these knights are simply dancing around the king. So here queen to e1 here by queen to f6, getting out of some potential rook takes d5, but now we want to take out this one. In the continuation of the game, rook to d5, but now queen to h4. You see, you cannot protect anymore this position. The queen finally sneaked in, like we said, in the middle of the game. If this happens, basically it's game over. Here Hikaru Nakamura tried this one, bishop to e4, but now queen to h1. You have to move, and now this knight comes with a check, king to e2, and now Magnus simply takes another pawn. It's really wild. And after move king to d3, in this position Hikaru Nakamura resigned. So really great game by Magnus Carlsen, using this strategical mistake by the Hikaru Nakamura. Now b5 is an opportunity, for instance here c4. So it's simply winning for Magnus Carlsen. He has now equalized the result, which means now that Magnus Carlsen needs only one draw now in the last game, and he's the winner of this tournament. I'm very curious what's going to happen, because now Hikaru has to play a sharp game. Magnus Carlsen got the win when we really needed a win. It was a great positional sacrifice by Magnus Carlsen, activating the knight like this. But as we said, f5 from that point on, it was really a one-way ticket for the world champion. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. Really brilliant stuff by Magnus Carlsen. If you want to see more games from this final, we have covered yesterday's game too. Here's also the link. Maybe you can also check it out. Watch some previous games also here from the tournament. Here are some great games that we have analyzed before. And if you want to see maybe the best chess games from all times, check out my best chess games of all time series. Here's also the link. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.